Welcome to Podclass. Podclass is sponsored by the Caribbean Teaching Scholar Journal and aims to demystify topics and themes within the scholarship of teaching and learning. Podclass is produced by the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning within the Settle Inc.'s Teaching Innovation Studio. We're excited to have you with us, and we hope you enjoy today's episode.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our podcast for this morning. We know that we've been looking forward to it and we've had you waiting long enough. So without further ado, again, welcome to this morning's session on academic research, the writing process. Now, we are looking forward to a very engaging session. So what we are asking of you is that you please be ready to interact with us, to toss your ideas. If you have questions, perhaps more than likely you are engaging in some research at the time. And if you would like direction, please feel free to use the chat or to raise your hand and unmute, and we would make it as interactive as possible so that we could all benefit each other and make it a real community of learners. That's the aim of this morning's session. So we all understand the importance of conducting authentic, high-quality research and disseminating it to the wider scholarly community. If we didn't understand or appreciate that importance, then we would not be doing what we're doing. And we know the role of the scholarship of teaching and learning, and in general research, as far as it goes to advancing knowledge and addressing even challenges, be it in the classroom or in society, and in contributing to policy and practice. However, we know that the reality is that research is not really complete until it's disseminated or shared via publication. So the art of academic writing is something that we really must hone in on and refine. And that is why we are here this morning with a very esteemed practitioner with whom we would have probably rubbed shoulders before. I'm sure some of you would have. And I'm introducing now Dr. Eric Blair. Dr. Blair is a reader in education and the director of graduate studies at the Queen Mary University of London. Did I get that correct, Eric? I know it's kind of a mouthful.
That is correct, yes, indeed. But more importantly, former colleague of the CETL UE Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes. Good memories, good times. And Eric, we are so happy to have you with us this morning. We really appreciate your time. And we look forward, as we said, we're going to put the local twist it. As interactive as possible, we're going to keep it. So what we have done for all of our listeners, of course, in the meantime, what you can perhaps do is just give us a brief background of yourself, as in perhaps what department you're from. If you're a staff or student, you can feel free to say that in the chat so we would know who is actually in the room with us today. Now, what we have done this morning is that we have divided that whole task that some people consider onerous and some people enjoy of writing a paper for publication. We have tried to break it down into 7 steps. And we are going to address this in a way that is going to simplify or make it as logical as possible, a process of actually putting the thought into practice at the point in time. And I know Eric is going to do a dang nabbed job of it with
No
us
pressure.
this morning. No pressure. So firstly, we're going to look at the very outset of any research, selecting a topic. And for some, I know for postgraduate students, that could be a tricky subject because they're more than likely trying to figure out where they are going, to what direction they're going. But for a staff member, you could be having a problem narrowing down your topic specific to your practice possibly, which makes it a little intricate. So Eric, tell us a bit, what are some of the things, the considerations from your perspective that one must give forethought to in selecting a research topic?
Yeah, I think it's an important question to consider before we start anything, because sometimes we can find ourselves rushing into research and wanting to have data and wanting to have a publication. But for me, we start with the word care. What do we care about? Because if you don't care about something, how can you put care into it? And you should definitely put care into your research and into your academic writing. And that's maybe easier for some people than others. So if you're doing a PhD, perhaps you're signed up to do a particular program, perhaps under a particular supervisor. So maybe you don't get as much choice. You have some choice, but not a lot of choice.
Yeah.
But as you move through your career, you tend to get a little bit more power, a little bit more choice, and the ability to choose something, a topic that speaks to you. I think that becomes really important, because it will see you through the highs and the lows. Writing is peaks and troughs. There are times when you're excited, you've got this new project, you want to get it, or you want to get on with it. There's other times when you get all this data, you think, what do I do with all this data? And then there's the final edit, and that can be frustrating and take longer. And there's all these bits that we're going to talk about today that can be frustrating. And if you don't feel some drive, some passion, something behind it, then it's going to be hard to stick with it when you hit those high times, and when things get busy, things are hectic. What do you do then? So I think for me, selecting a topic, if you can choose, if you have the ability to choose something you care about, it will make your writing journey hopefully a lot easier.
Yeah, definitely. And you know that, thinking of it, a topic kind of determines the relevance too of what you're about to begin embarking on. So, as you said, if you have a choice, if you're in that scenario where you could actually choose and something is not being given to you as a mandate, you want to give consideration to where am I going with this? What is really needed within the field at this point in time? Because you don't want to come up with a topic, you be ecstatic about it, and then only to find out that it's only you are ecstatic about it.
That's
And
true. That's true.
yeah. And that's time wasted. That's time wasted.
Yeah, I think the quick way around that is to make sure once you've found your topic, once you've identified the thing that speaks to you, is like you're saying, does anybody else care about it? And if no one cares about it, perhaps that's good. Perhaps no one has thought about it, and you've found this perfect niche, and you can make that your research niche, and you can become the expert in this area that's completely unexplored. But the counterpoint to that is perhaps nobody's interested in what you've got to say. They don't feel the care for this particular topic either.
Exactly.
You've got to gauge what is out there. And the other way of gauging what is out there is to look at the literature that already exists. Because I might feel passionate about something. I might have a great research idea. I might think, yes, I'm definitely going to do this project, but it might already exist. And so I need to get to the literature. I need to get out there and find out, does it already exist? And if somebody else has already produced this research, why am I doing it in the first place? I think that's probably another way of thinking about the gaps, if you like. Am I filling a gap? Is this gap already filled? Does anybody want me to fill this gap at all?
Yeah. And as you said, that you need to think of, as you said, it's kind of like, if we were to use the jargon for it, you're thinking of the feasibility and the originality of it. From those two perspectives, you got to keep thinking of that. And the good part is, if we do have postgraduate students on here, this is where you got your research supervisor, and this is where you got to sit down and have those discussions with the supervisor, because more than likely the supervisor is going to be more aware of the literature in the field. And that is definitely going to help if we make time for the conversation. Now, if you're a practitioner, what advice would you give to someone who is already, let's say, a lecturer, instructor, they're pursuing academic research, obviously with the aim to publish, they're having a hard time narrowing down, and they're trying to determine how best, perhaps as we'd say, they put themselves into a corner. As far as the internet goes, they alone know what they had in mind, and they put themselves into a corner. What suggestion could we then give for those in such a case?
Yeah, well, I think there's two things, and one kind of speaks to what you were saying. If you're a research student, you work with your supervisor, but the advice that I would give to academics, the more senior colleagues, would be to make sure you've got research students working with you. They're a great source of inspiration. They ask fantastic questions, sometimes naive questions, and that can be really useful because it's the questions that after a while you've been in a topic, you've been studying this, you kind of think you know everything. And then somebody asks you a question, it's just like, whoa, that just blows my mind. That's fantastic. And that's the beauty of working with research students, masters, PhDs. So I'm very lucky in my role. I work with lots of postgraduate students. And I think the relationship works two ways. There should be inspiration in both ways. So that's one bit of advice. If you're a seasoned academic, make sure you're in there working with postgrads and listening to the voice of the postgrads as well. Yeah. And the other thing I think is the big word, it's the I word, impact. That should be where we're going. What is going to be impactful today? I've been working in education, writing in education for about 25 years now. I know I look so young, eh? But what was important 25 years ago and what would have made an impact 25 years ago is different to what will make an impact today. So I need to stay relevant. And the literature that underpins my teaching tends to be the literature that was from the first 10 years of my studies and as an academic. That still underpins my teaching. But the literature that underpins my research must be much more recent than that. I need to be read. I need to be involved with the journals. I need to review papers so that I can see what is the zeitgeist, what's happening now, and where do I need to make that impact.
Yeah. So we could safely say then that selecting a research topic is not a one-off thing, it's iterative.
Yeah.
That we're going to keep digging and digging. And the only aid really to making those refinements, apart from liaising with a peer, is if you're actually keeping up to date with the literature. So you have to be reading to keep up to date. You made the comparison 25 years to now, but if we could think of just the last 3 years, every single thing has changed again. So you're seeing how that concept of defining a research topic, the things that we need to consider before we just jump on and begin researching and writing and thinking that we're making groundbreaking headway into a topic or a field. We really need to pull back, chat, read, figure it out, and refine.
Yeah. But the good news, Mark, is that academics and scholars are nosy people. They like finding stuff out. They're macos, aren't they? They want to know everything.
Yes. They're letting the Trini come out.
They want to find out what's going on in the world. They want to look over the fence next door and see what's going on. And that drive to inquire, to know, the drive for knowledge hopefully keeps people at the cutting edge and keeps them asking those questions. So we're not relying on even as you say, three years ago, what we knew. The world has changed a long way since then, and we need to keep up with that. And as I say, the great thing is people join us today and people listening probably already have the skill set because they're active, they're thoughtful, they're asking questions, they're inquiring about the world. So if that's kind of you already, you're probably the right person to keep up.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I just want to make sure, I want to give a little time to the audience to make sure if anyone has any questions, because we don't want to leave anyone out as we move forward from step 1 into step 2, 3, and then we reach 7 and boom, we're lost. So if you have any questions, feel free, please, to unmute, chime in, or a comment, or you'd like to use the chat. It's up to you. So you can have a couple minutes that we'd allow for that before we move on, just to ensure that clarity is the call of the day, the norm of the day. So what we've discussed so far is the fact that our selecting a research topic must be given its due attention. It is the foundation of what we are going to embark on for the next few, be it months, for some persons it's years. Of course, if you're pursuing some concept or project that is going to take a while, the time could be different. The time could definitely be different. And perhaps, Eric, before we move on, we could perhaps brainstorm a quick topic as an example. So let us say we have a sociology. We're in sociology, and I'm choosing something neutral to both of us here. So it's sociology, and I am thinking about, let's say, mental attitudes of let me just say postgraduate, tertiary level students to social media. How could we, so that's a broad framework that we have.
Mm-hmm.
How could we banter and narrow this down a bit?
Yeah.
How could we banter?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thanks for putting me on the spot. But I think what you're demonstrating is really kind of useful though, because often when we start thinking about a project, a research idea, we have kind of a vague kind of thing, and you're not really sure. The way you expressed that, you were exploring it, I could see you thinking about parts of it, and you're trying to express it. And it wasn't a clean and easy question, and it rarely is. And what I would tend to do at this point is to think about, well, what are the three themes in what you just said? And then we can take that, put some kind of three themes from tertiary is obviously one of the themes, and then we can unpack that. So we look at what are the big things from your sort of vague idea. I don't mean that in a rude way, but I mean just you were kind of conceptualizing something.
It was very vague.
So, and then what we need to do is pull out the three big words, the three big themes, and then we research, we talk about those, we examine those, and we think, well, what can we do about those? Yeah. I think that's the way to do it. And that will help us later on as well when we come to things like literature, because we'll then be able to look for literature under the three topic headings that we've discovered. Because there's lots of literature about tertiary education and lots about perceptions, and so we could explore those in much more detail as well.
Yeah. And as we're setting the foundation, since the research topic is the foundation for research, it is also, in a sense, the foundation for this session. So what we want to establish is that we have the traditional way of doing research, but we need to realize that in our teaching practice now, as academics, you also have the field of action research that promotes an inquiry-based approach to your own teaching, to your own way of teaching. Am I doing something that is actually impacting my learners? Am I doing it too much, too little? And I'm already seeing the questions that are popping into my head. Again, it's going to be vague, but we're seeing that the point I'm making is that in the field, for whatever different discipline we are in, we need to pull back for a second and realize that we can do research on our own teaching practice. And that is the focus that we want to have. So we want to consider the scholarly gaps, yes, but we want to consider that there could be room for research within our own gaps in our practice.
Yeah, it's a good idea. I mean, action research is so powerful. Researchers, by and large, want to change the world or change part of the world. And you want to improve things. That's kind of often how we get into things. We want to find out an answer, we want to find a solution, we want to apply the solution. And that could be something quite grand, and we'll have colleagues who do research into cancer and into mechanical engineering, and they'll build bridges and they'll discover these big things, and that's really important. But what you're saying there, Mark, is also really important. If we can be reflexive and understand ourselves and then work to improve our own practice through action research, we're also solving problems, local problems, that will have a further impact. Because when you improve your local situation, you make it better for everyone around you. There's that kind of ripple effect that can happen. And this is something, and previously action research was almost overlooked or people look down on it somehow. And more it's come to the fore. It's something that says, this makes a difference. It makes an immediate difference, you know, and it's making a difference to my immediate world, not some out there abstract world. It's sort of change I can see. And who doesn't like change they can see?
Exactly, because the same action research could lead to a better bridge builder. If we have delivered the content to that learner and that person becomes the builder, we could end up with a better bridge builder.
There
So
we go.
it's tangible things and that's why I'm saying we want to not just spotlight traditional research, but we want to keep in mind we have our action research inquiry-based approach to teaching. So that's a good deal on the research topic. Now, if we move on, I'm seeing a question in the chat, but I want to come to that question a little later on in the session. But we want to discuss a bit now about the lit review. Everything that we have said so far in the research topic selection is coming back to being aware of what is going on, what is new, what is relevant at the point in time. What are your thoughts then? We've got the topic. We have how many ever hours of teaching to do? How do we go about finding a feasible way to do a literature review that could help us keep to a schedule and not be overwhelmed?
Yeah, I think again we have to, if we're going to make things rational and workable, we need to again think about why we're doing things rather than just do things. We need to think about why we're doing things, and a literature review is like that. Most of us have been at times, like I remember when I was a student, asked to do a literature review, and that was the only instruction I got: do a literature review. And now as an academic, I'm asked to write a literature review, and nobody really tells me why or to what ends or how I should do it. And there isn't always a lot of teaching and learning about how you can do these types of things. We're seeing more of it, and I'm really pleased about that. We're seeing guidance on how to do it. But I think you need to think about the role of the literature review.
Yeah.
And by and large, it's to do two things. It's to inform the reader about where you're coming from. It kind of brings them up to speed with, this is what I'm talking about, this is my position on this, this is kind of what you need to know. And in order to progress with this piece of research, this is your introduction. So it sets the scene, it sets the ground. But also for you, it does a slightly different thing. As a researcher, it gives you direction. And it says, this is the path I'm following. Because once you can see what is there, the extant literature, once you can see that, you can say, now I know my route forward because I know what is known. I've got facts, I've got figures, I've got theories, I've got key words, key terms. This is the path that I'm following. And that's really useful. So you're doing two things in this lit review. You get an introduction for the reader and direction for the writer.
So this is where we'll be able to identify any gaps. We know what we could perhaps end up with a case where there have been drastic changes or dramatic changes in the environment. Okay, last 3 years. And then this has now forced a whole new body of research across different disciplines, but inherent to what has occurred. And if I, going back to sociology, were to the example, were to ignore what has happened, and I'm only pulling the literature now from 2015, 2016, and I'm saying, yes, social media use, and this is what would happen. I'm technically saying that 2023 social media is the same as 2015 social media. And I'm saying that 2023 tertiary student reaction is the same as it was in 2015. But it's no longer the case. But if I read, I would realize, hey, that is no longer the case because of what has happened. But apart from allowing us to identify gaps and needs, you know, the good thing about a literature review sometimes, as far as the theory goes, is we could even refine theories.
Mm-hmm.
We could even refine theories. So we could build on what is already there because we have now seen a new way for it to be applied. Have you ever been in that situation or observed something similar to that?
Yes, I think that definitely happens, and you can see that by reading what is there, you get that sort of personal theory, you might think of it. So rather than a grand theory of understanding, you get a personal or professional academic theory of, I see what's going on here. I tend to do that when I'm looking at literature, and I make sure that literature is involved in critical debates. So when it comes, so for example, a paragraph to me in a literature review is not successful if it has fewer than three voices in it. Because if it has one voice, that's a description of a piece of literature. If it has two voices, okay, I'm seeing two different perspectives.
Yep.
But if I can triangulate three bits of literature and have that critical debate that one person says A, one person says B, one person says C, that helps me then get the big picture, because then I can do my job to pull it together, to analyze it, and to build this personal theory of what I think is going on here.
And that's a bullet point that we want to pull away. A good piece of advice is you have the 3 sources per paragraph in your lit review.
I think I mean, just as a rough guide. And the good thing about 3 sources is, if they all agree, you can conclude that paragraph by saying, it would seem that, and then you can say, well, because everybody's of the same mind. If there's 2 voices saying one thing, one voice is dissenting, you could say, on the balance of opinion, the literature suggests, and you come up with a nice conclusion to that paragraph. And if the 3 of them say 3 different things, you can conclude that paragraph by saying there is no consensus of opinion. In both those 3 cases, those 3 different outcomes, you can then say, based on this, I'm going to do X, Y, or Z. You're going to explore further based on the outcome of those 3 paragraphs.
Exactly.
So not only am I seeing 3 voices, but I'd also come up with a mini conclusion to that paragraph before I move to paragraph 2.
And which would also validate what's happening, that it's not that one is right and the other 2 are wrong. It's not that we are saying that, but it's 3 possibilities because we have used a wide enough body of literature in our research. Now, given the fact that we have busy schedules, I'm going to say this, and I hope everybody takes it with a pinch of salt. We need to find a way to be faster at completing some of these steps in research. One way in completing a literature review a little faster sometimes involves using AI. And no, AI does not mean that we're cheating. It's the first thing that comes to people's minds, but we want to be able to use AI, which is obviously going to be around for as far as we can see, in a way that can benefit us in our own practice. What are your thoughts on this? We're going to discuss that for a bit.
Yeah, I mean, we're at a very interesting moment in history where we're at the place now where AI might be writing all possible future literature reviews. It can do it well. It can pull together what is known. And if I said the job of literature is twofold, to inform the reader about the topic and to give direction to the academic themselves, AI can do that for us as well as we can do it ourselves. I think we need to be involved in the process somehow. We can't just simply put all the search terms, put all the keywords into AI, and there's lots of fantastic software out there, lots of online stuff, and accept what it gives us. We still then need to be scrupulous in reviewing what the AI has produced for us. So it's not simply them doing the job. The other thing people are saying, well, this is cheating. But I remember when people introduced databases into the library, and you could do a search on just something simple like JSTOR, and you could do a search for literature. And I remember people there saying, well, it's cheating. You're supposed to go into the library. You're supposed to read the books. You're supposed to open the books. And nobody's thinking like that anymore. We've got these great tools, often through the libraries, where we can find the sources. Sure. We're at the stage now where the technology finds the sources for us and we compile them. But with AI, we're taking it to the next step, where they're finding the sources for us under our instruction. They're compiling possible sentences, possible paragraphs, possible lit reviews, and we're still involved in the process. Clearly, we're all aware of the dangers of this when somebody just cuts and pastes and sends it in.
Exactly.
That's the danger. And I don't have an easy answer to that one, but I think there's a lot of people working and thinking on this at the moment.
Yeah, yeah.
But you
So
know, if there's a tool, why wouldn't we use it? You know?
yeah, exactly. And you know, as you said, it's not, if we are using AI, we are not saying that you just jump on and you tell it spit out a literature review for you. But here's an example. So I was playing around with some stuff the other day, doing a mock literature review, and I'm looking at the time I took through online database searches using Scholar and other different databases. And then I used one of the new AI for Bing. And I'm not going to use the others because Bing is quite accurate in terms of the fact that it actually includes citations and references. So cheat sheet, I might be able to save some time if I decide to, of course, with a very good prompt, tell the tool what it is that I want to do. But I'm not, as you said, going to just copy and paste. But the point we want to pull away is that we can use the AI to quickly identify the sources that we could now go and read. And even in Bing, it actually allows you to pinpoint the page sometimes, the paragraph, the exact location within an article. So, you know, it's like in a recent chat, we don't always, you may not always have a research assistant who would in the past go get
Yeah.
the article, read it, get the literature, and come back with the points, blah, blah, blah. But we have the tools and we want to be aware of how AI is going to affect our research practice. And we want to think of it as being beneficial. Beneficial. It makes no sense that we have a hammer and we have a nail to be hammered, but we decide to use a pot spoon. It does not make sense. If we have a tool, we use the tool.
Yeah.
We use the tool.
And I think also it helps equalize the world. If we think about some of the ancient universities in the world and the super wealthy universities of the world, and even some of the ultra modern universities that are really wealthy and developing in China. And China now has some fantastic universities, very well funded. It is very hard for all institutions to keep up with that race because they have these huge libraries, they have access to all this material, they can pay professors' wages that bring in the best and the brightest.
Yeah.
And AI might be one of the tools that help kind of level the playing field a little bit, where universities in the global south, universities in the developing world, universities that may have been overlooked in the past can now have access to these really powerful tools and produce scholarship that is on a par with any of the sort of Cambridge or Oxford or Harvard or whoever you
All
want
the
to
Ivy
mention.
League guys.
Yeah, exactly. You know, so and that's going to really going to be important if we're going to kind of break this sort of hierarchy of these elite universities of the world and everybody else ranked below that. We need to have tools to do that. We need to have means of doing that. And maybe AI is one of the tools of helping us. And I'm pretty sure the guys at the top at Harvard and University of Oxford and all the rest of it, I'm pretty sure they're using AI already.
Of course they are. Perhaps before all of the others.
Possibly. They probably wrote the AI, that's the thing.
Exactly. That was perhaps somebody's research project.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. So, you know, we've realized that we've covered the research topic selection. We've talked about how a literature review, quite frankly, as you suggested, it should be triangulated paragraph by paragraph as far as possible. We've seen the fact that it's going to take time. It's not the easiest thing in the world, but the literature review is what really helps us to advance the knowledge, because we need to know what the knowledge base is first before we advance anything that is possibly there or not there. So we're going to have to make time for reading. Even if we're using AI, we're going to have to make time for more reading and to make sense of what is there. It's not just a quick and easy. We need to take time with that step in research. Now, apart from the literature review now, we finished the literature review. Oh, I see we have a hand. And before we take that hand, before you unmute Priscilla, I just want to thank Elliot from the library for responding to that question in the chat. And again, thank you for that. That's kind of like a community or collaborative approach that you were able to give assistance in the interim. So Priscilla, you can go ahead with your question.
Sorry, Mr. Garcia, I raised my hand in error. No question.
Okay. No
Yeah.
problem, no problem, no problem. So we're going on now. After we've done that, those two things, we want to define specific objectives and hypotheses. Specific things. How important is it to have a very clear objective and hypothesis or hypotheses? Sorry.
Yeah, that is an important question. And I think the two need to be looked at separately, but for many scholars, because some work will have objectives and some work will have hypotheses. Basically, these objectives and hypotheses are the sort of the testable commodities of your research. This is the thing that says, I know my process of research has been successful because I've set this out. So an objective is what you're trying to achieve, and it's often a verb, it's often measurable. And hypothesis is something that you want to test.
Right.
And again, it's measurable as well, because you can get to the end and you say, here's my results, here's what I thought was going to happen. And by combining the two, you can test your hypothesis. I thought this, however, I found this. That's a test. And objectives are the same thing. It says, this is what I hope to achieve by the end of my project. And by you get to the end of the project and you say, well, did I do it? So you could do something like deliver a framework for assessing flow rates inside a pipe. And that deliver is the verb, the checkable verb. And so that is a nice testable objective. Mm-hmm. If you're going to do it from a more quantitative position or a paradigm where you're interested in testing hypothesis, you would say this particular pipe, my hypothesis one, this particular pipe would have a flow rate of X under these conditions, whereas it would have, and pipe two, you'd have this. So you'd have a number of different things. But in both cases, you would come up with probably a kind of verb-based outcome that can be tested. And it's not an outcome that says, this is my answer. It's an outcome that says, this is a check of my methods. This is a check of what I'm hoping to do. This is a check of the processes that I'm going through in my research. Mm-hmm. So I think that if you're going to check something at the end of it, this comes back to your question. It needs, whatever your objective is, whatever your hypothesis needs to be super clear, because cloudy things are hard to check. Vague things are hard to check.
Yeah, always.
Specific things are checkable. So you want to keep your objectives quite tight. Here's 3 short bullets or 3 short hypotheses. Clear. People sometimes overwrite these and they write multi-part hypotheses, and you've got this thing that's like 2 sentences long, and you think there's too much in here. What is your point? What is your focus? So short, sharp, focused objectives, short, sharp, focused hypotheses are much more checkable come the end point, and it'll basically help you as a scholar keep your work tight.
Yeah. And, I'm thinking of a topic here. I actually thought up something yesterday, and I made a note of it. And you're thinking of an overall objective of a study to examine effects of cooperative learning on academic achievement among tertiary level students. Very broad. But then what I can do now is create these specific objectives. And now I can begin comparing academic achievements of students who participated in the cooperative learning approach with those who did not. I could look at an objective could be now to compare motivation levels of students who were in the test or who were not. And then another objective could help me to figure out the relationship between the motivation and the achievement now of those who did and who did not. So it's helping me narrow down, but go back to answer my overall test if the collaborative learning approach worked. That hypothesis of it is going to work, yea or nay. Yeah. The specific objectives are now helping me to drill down in that. And I just want to highlight something someone is saying in the chat. She says she reads systematic reviews in her topic to get a good grasp of what was done in the field before looking at a focused literature for her paper. So it is the same idea. You begin, and then you begin to come down more conical as you refine, and your objectives is those are your real assets, if for want of a better word, that help us to pinpoint, because we already start big with the overall topic, and we still drilling down. We talk about it throughout the literature review, and it comes up here again. So the hypotheses, the objectives are something that we want to be thoughtful about. Again, if you're a postgrad student, this is where you want to take the time with your supervisor to thrash out your ideas, propose new things, what you might have in mind. And someone is now asking a question in the chat. Which is best for a study? Is it developing hypotheses or developing research questions? Does it matter? And that's from Michelle Gill.
Yeah.
Perhaps we could talk about that a bit.
It's a really good question, Michelle, and I'm glad you asked it. For me, I would tend to start with my question. And then in thinking about the possible outcomes of my question, I'm then developing hypotheses, because these are my likely outcomes. And hypotheses should be likely outcomes. There's no point in having a hypothesis that is just so far out there. Through doing the review of the literature, so as Priscilla said in the chat, and as we were talking earlier on, giving that literature review kind of narrows down to what is likely to be known, what is likely to be found out. So but in my work, I start with a really cloudy question at the start. It's just kind of some vague ideas. I'll boil it down into 3 themes, as we spoke earlier on. And then that comes down after my literature review into quite a tight question. So I've kind of filtered down through this process. And now I've got to my question, as tight a question as I can get, and I've got all the background understanding. And so reflecting back and now I think, well, these are the possible likely outcomes based on this question, and those will be my hypothesis. If I'm doing that type of theory testing project, and a hypothesis approach is theory testing. If I'm doing theory generation, and I want to find out what's out there, I want to find participant perspectives, or if I'm doing something like action research, which is less hypothesis testing and more local theory generation, I still go through the same process. Start with a cloudy question, go through my literature, come up with a tight question, and then I start thinking more about objectives. How am I going to answer this question? What are the stages that I'll go through in order to gauge that my work is tight and valid and legitimate and going to lead to a likely good answer? So for both those approaches, I would then start with the question, but before the question, we've got all this literature to get through and to refine first of all.
So Michelle, I hope that answers your question. But it's making a point that critical thinking is required, and again, logic. We don't want to, at any point, we don't want to sacrifice creativity at the same time. So we want to have that measure always of making sure that our voice is clear, even if it is something radical. A lot of the journals today are actually quite different from what we know in our earlier times of what some of these journals they promulgate. And I'm thinking of one in particular. I'm not going to call it name, but its approach could even be described by some traditional researchers as radical, because even the way the topics it entertains within a call for papers, the ideas that it could choose, I found it so interesting to see how things are changing. So again, while we're being logical and critical thinkers, we do not want to give up our creative elements, our own voice in research. Yeah. So I think that answers her question from what you have said. And we've now discussed how hypotheses, the testing side of things, along with the research objectives, could really drill down further. So Michelle is saying she supposes this is dependent on the research design that you are using. So
yeah, it's true. I mean, if you're taking, I mean, we spoke about action research, you might be doing some ethnographic research, you might be doing a lab-based project. At the moment, I'm involved in some creative inquiry. You talk about these kind of the new journals and new perspectives. So creative inquiry, we're using haiku as a short form of poetry, as a data collection technique. And a colleague of mine is using painting, and she's using it in medical education, painting as a data collection model, and publishing that work in journals. So really, a lot of depends on the type of research you're doing, whether it's about the design, the format, action research, ethnography, phenomenology, or whatever, or whether it's about, if it's cutting edge stuff, perhaps, or radical thinking or creative thinking, all that's going to feed into, well, because of this background, I now need to do my research in this way, or I think this is the best way to do my research. And we're back to, I mean, you kind of hinted at this earlier on when you talk about tools. It's the right tool for the right job. Once you design the job, you found the tool. You don't need to design the tool because it will automatically come. If you've made this, if you're doing painting, you need a paintbrush. You dig the garden, you need a shovel. That's how it works.
And it's like someone, I think Dr. Hill mentioned earlier in the chat, it's like a dinner table, inviting a guest to speak. And you interrogate, you talk, you chat. So perhaps in what Michelle is asking too, consideration comes back to what can you discern from the literature? What is their way of writing? Because sometimes you could pick these things up when you read articles. You could learn from the writer how they approach their design, regardless of the field at times. And I'm going to just highlight another comment in the chat where another Michelle says that she reviews as many recent articles and she pulls out the different constructs measured. She looks for the gaps and looking at areas recommended for future research. So again, it's coming back to how well we make use of the literature in guiding our way forward, not making that journey easy.
Yeah, and I think that these comments also show us the importance of literature. So we were having this kind of discussion earlier on: is AI cheating? It sounds like even if we used AI to form a literature review, we can see in the chat here people how they use literature to stay informed, to find gaps, to be aware of themes, constructs, ideas. So the literature maybe is doing a different job. It's still hugely underpinning our project, even if we're using AI. And that's quite interesting. It seemed earlier on we were talking about an either or principle, and now we're talking about a combined principle. We can use AI, but we still want to have this deep understanding. We want to find the gaps. We want to have this dining table of ideas where we kind of have this discussion and we kind of get excited what is coming out of the literature. So that's kind of interesting that we're now thinking in the space of like 20 minutes we'll move from either or to a combined model.
A combination.
Yeah.
And it's nice that because of discussion and collaboration you get that kind of thing. And that's why we said from the outset that you want to consult with a peer for advice. You want to run an idea by, do it, because that is how you drill down. In 20 minutes we have drilled down here, and it's just an example of how it could be replicated into the real world situation of research. So we've done topic, we've done lit review, we've done objectives, hypothesis. Now we want to go into the nice good old headache of data collection and analysis. Everybody's first thought, hard work. You're thinking rigor, validity. What are some of the methods perhaps of data collection or some new things in the field that we could think about before we just jump in?
Yeah, I think the first thing is making sure we don't default to our established ways of doing things. And that's very easy. Humans are creatures of habit. We like to have certain patterns. We go to certain places, we have certain friends, we like certain foods. So humans are creatures of habit, and researchers are often creatures of habit as well. And so, especially if you're working, if you're working with someone who's doing their very first research project, they'll default to something quite simple like a questionnaire. And they'll say, I can get lots of data, I can get it quite quickly, I can send it out there. And you know, well, what questions are you going to ask? And that somehow that's come second. And they know they want to do a questionnaire, then you have to help them ask the questions. It's like, well, what made you think about questionnaire if you didn't have questions? So people can get, and then people after a while stick with what they know. They say, well, I've always done questionnaires, I've always done semi-structured interviews, I've always run focus groups. And that's how I find out data. So there's kind of two things at play here. There's the established patterns, and we need to make sure we are questioning our own established ways of doing things.
Yeah.
Just because I've always done it a certain way doesn't mean I should always do it a certain way.
Yeah.
So I need to be thinking we're right back to the best tool for the job type of thinking, you know.
Exactly.
And semi-structured interviews are fantastic. You get lots of qualitative data. I'm a qualitative researcher, love them. But there's other times where a different format, I was talking about haiku earlier on, that's a whole different way of generating data. And it was because that was the nature of the project. And for me, that's the thing you do it. In cookery, they have this notion of reduction. So you make a sauce and it reduces down until you have this really thick, refined, unctuous, beautiful sauce at the end of it, yeah? And that is what, that thing at the end, the I don't know what we're going to call that, the refined product is what we should be doing with our research. You should be looking at your research. What am I doing? Refining it down to what is the essence of my research. And once you've got the essence of your research, then you can ask in the tool, you ask the question, what do I want to know? And therefore, what tool should I use? And so it's not about established patterns, and it's not about defaults, and it's not about this sounds easy and that sounds hard. It's about looking at the essence of what you're doing, the essence of what you want to know, and then asking the question, and what is the best way of finding the answer to that question?
Yeah.
And it will change.
Yeah, I think people have to realize again their own voice and the individuality of your research to some extent. Because if you, as you use the example of not going with what you know, we have to be mindful of the fact that different kinds of research are going to require different kinds of data. So you, as you said, you would use qualitative, somebody else might use quantitative, but there might be a case for mixed methods.
Mm-hmm.
And that is going to impact, obviously, your choices in obtaining your data. So you're going to have surveys, probably you're going to have, as you said, semi-structured interviews. But suppose you might need an observation checklist. So again, okay, in the case of action research, I am looking at student broad term here, engagement, and I'm defining it as number of interaction moments within a course, within its group at a table. For that, I need an observation checklist, because while I'm teaching and the group work is going on, I can now note what's happening, how many times it has happened, and that is not something that I expect to capture in a survey post the group work. That's going to be pretty messy. So we have to realize that each project is going to dictate something different. Add to that the fact that the literature is also going to be a guide, again, in selecting the best means. So it keeps making that we're going right back again and again to, yes, we are guided by what the literature is saying, but we don't want to sacrifice our creativity. So we want to know, yes, that it's rigorous, but we want to use the right tool for the job. It must be a goodness of fit for purpose.
Yeah.
I don't think we could get away from that.
Yeah, and I think you've said creative a number of times, and I think that is important. We did some research, some colleagues and I, a while back, and we're looking at primary school children as they were their participants, and we were thinking, how are we going to get the answers from them? Are we going to ask? We can't really do a questionnaire. It was some of the things were complicated. To do semi-structured interviews would be a lot of pressure for a youngster, sitting in front of this old man asking them questions, that'd be hard. Focus groups, we kind of thought that would work because they'd maybe be together and they'd support each other, and they're maybe used to that type of learning. And like when the teacher asks them a question, they ask a class, and the class answers together.
Exactly.
But what we came up with actually was we were going to use the playground, and we had flags at four corners of the playground, and one had a flag A, the next one's B, C, and D. And when we asked them a question, they had to run to the flag that they agreed with. And that was our data. We just counted the number of students who stood by flag A, counted the number of students who stood by flag B, and so on. It's more or less a questionnaire, but it was suitable to the participants. It was engaging for the participants, so they were more likely to answer the questions. Whereas maybe if we gave them a questionnaire, they would have given up on question 3 or question 4. We asked them to do this task that was interesting, that was healthy. We did it as part of we had worked with their PE teacher, and so it was part of their curriculum. It didn't interfere with their learning. We got our data, and they had a nice time, I think. So that is like, I'm basing it on the participant group and what was the best tool for that group, rather than what was the best tool for me as a researcher.
Exactly. And again, coming back to individuality and unique nature of your own research, that you need to know what works, what is going to work for you. And again, this is how conversation benefits us, because I'm thinking about what you're saying, and I actually missed an opportunity just yesterday, because someone was asking me about constructing a class activity where it was a math subject, and the students were put into groups, but it was set up in a way that when they complete one activity, it was almost like a race, literally, because they had to physically move to the next checkpoint to get that activity done. And I'm thinking now of something that you're saying, and I'm like, that would have been an interesting thing to note and observe during the actual activity in progress. Seeing a question here, again, it is something that I think we just need to realize we have to set limits on, that our demands are high. We could never give up teaching entirely to do research, let's say. They are required in tandem. But we have to realize that within our own construct of doing a literature review, because the person, Denise, is saying that everything keeps going back to the literature review, that there is a point in time that our literature review would tell us what's out there. So the key things we're looking for is what is out there, what's the grounding theory, most recent things, the debate on the topic to identify the gaps. But at that point in time, we can't keep reading and adding because you never finish research. So if we have covered the basis of the founding, the ground theory, and the other things that we mentioned, then at that point in time, we could safely move forward. Of course, if we come across something, it's not that we're reading it deeply to take this amount of time and effort from us mentally, but we have the limit of the checkpoints that we want to establish as we move through the lit review, to just allow for our own sanity in practice.
Yeah, I think with literature review, we have to first of all realize there is no finished literature review. It is impossible to have a complete literature review. Even a systematic review, there'll be another published paper. And so things are always growing. And literature at the moment seems to be growing exponentially.
Yeah.
So my system for literature is, once I've got my rough draft of my literature section or my chapter or whatever it might be, I plan using a concentric circle model. So I have mapped out just a bunch of concentric circles, and in the middle, I've got the name of the 2, 3, 4 authors that I think are absolutely key to my study. They are central to my study. And then coming out, the authors become less and less important. Still relevant, still saying good stuff, but just not bang in the center. So each ring of each concentric layer becomes further out, less and less important to my study. And I do two things with that. First of all, I use it as a self-check, because if I've deemed these people right in the middle of this concentric circle to be important, I probably should have mentioned them 2 or 3 times. So I can do a little check like that, because why have I mentioned these guys in the outsides? and I haven't mentioned this person, but I thought they were important. So I can do it as a self-check. And also I can do it as a future literature check, because any future literature coming in, I can look at that source and say, well, where does this fit on my layer of concentric circles? And if it's way on the outside, then it doesn't really maybe matter. It's a minor opinion, it's one little thing. But if it's, I say, actually, if I had this early on, this would be in the centre of my study, I probably need to go back into my literature review with that piece of work and put it in there because it matters. So I'm making some kind of nuanced judgment about what difference will this new literature make. There's always going to be something popping out, but you need to make that judgment. Otherwise, you're working forever. And as Denise says, it's a hectic semester. People are busy.
Yeah.
But maybe that takes us back to the action research thing, because action research, instead of splitting teaching and research, has research of teaching. And we can have a busy semester that is also a research semester as well. So maybe that's taking us back to something you already mentioned a couple of times.
I'm glad you're mentioning it, because it's something that we are striving very hard to highlight on campus. And for all who are here engaged with us, it is something that you're going to see a lot more of from us. And we are inviting you, if you have an idea, if you're thinking of something that you would like to address, again, using an inquiry-based approach to your teaching practice, run it by us. Let's bounce ideas off as a community of learners. So one thing we want to discuss, or quickly highlight rather, in data collection, we want to be mindful of the ethics. And we are collecting private information, confidential information that the research subject expects you to keep confidential. So we want to be mindful of simple practical things. Where do I store the data? Is it on a flash drive that somebody could swipe from my desk? Is it on a cloud that sits somewhere else that is not secure, that somebody else could access? Where does the server sit? All of these are some of the things. And of course, the first stage of informed consent. We want to ensure that the person participating is aware of what is expected of them. And we want to make sure that they are comfortable from start all the way to finish, So with that in mind, everybody wants to know how, if it was a genie to pop out of a bottle, how do you craft now a scholarly article for publication? So we've done the first 4 steps. How do we craft the paper structure? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. Generally, there's a generally known structure of academic work, and it starts with abstract, introduction, literature review, method or methodology, depending on your paradigm. Then we'll have data analysis, discussion, conclusion. So there's a general model, and some of that might flex a little bit. For example, some journals you publish with might say data and data analysis, and they want it combined, and others want it 2 different sections. Some say we don't use the word data, we use the word findings. So you'll have some nuances in there, but that's the general model we're playing to. So when it comes to structuring your work, that's we know what we're looking for, which is really helpful because we've got a framework. And if you're one of those people that likes to say things like, well, the journal's looking for 6,000 words, you can now start allocating word count to each subsection without actually having any words. You can just say introduction, 150 words. You can just start doing that type of thing. And for some people, that's kind of useful because you think writing 7,000 words is a lot, but writing an introduction of 1,000 words is an achievable task. So when it comes to crafting it, people have different approaches. But I think we start with that. The next thing to do is think about who you're writing for. When we structure a paper, we're writing for someone. We're writing for an audience, but we're also writing for, probably, if we're talking about academic papers, a journal. What I tend to do when I'm working on a project, I get to that stage sort of 2/3 of the way through, and then I start looking for likely journals. And I find my hit list of likely journals, my top target and so on, all the way down. And then I start looking at what articles in those journals look like. So I look at the structure of those. And as I say, they all look slightly different. They're looking, each journal, you go to its website, it will give you its scope, it will give you its aims, it will give you what it's looking for. So then you start thinking about, let me look at what these things really look like. I would highly recommend that if people do this, they choose articles that are nothing to do with their research. Choose an article that's like completely different, you know. The reason why is if you read an article about something you're interested in, you'll get caught up in the narrative, the story, and you'll start following the actual process, the flow of the work. If you choose an article that's nothing to do with you, then you can focus on the structure, the format, how much time is given to one section. Does the journal expect us to have bullet points? Does it expect us to have flowing sentences? Should it be sharp? Should it be snappy? So that's my kind of go-to, you know, read those 3 or 4 articles that are for the right journal, but of the wrong topic. That will give you the specific structure, if you like.
Yeah, it sounds radical, but as you said it from where I sit, I have a couple in the audience physically here with me, and I'm seeing heads nodding away to that suggestion. And you know, it kind of it helps us change, you know, the lens that we wear when we are looking at where my research is going. It gives me a new perspective because it's not something I can be. I don't want to use the word emotional because you think bias, but I already have an understanding of that topic. So I'm going to be critiquing this thing to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that suggestion of reading something that is not up your alley, just to get an idea of flow, arguments, logical coherence, those kinds of things. And, you know, I'm sure you know where I'm going down with the road when I say this word, mama guy. But we have a little time to discuss the mama guy side of things on that. I'll leave that one for you.
Okay, yeah, this is a slightly dangerous area, but I think it's worth us thinking about. And this is not my suggestion. This is just us exploring something. If you are going to send an article to a journal, it is quite common to cite some papers from that journal. And it's also relatively common to cite one maybe from the editor of that journal or from the editorial board of that journal. Now, it might be that you're doing that for all the right reasons, and hopefully it is, that you're doing that because I'm writing for this journal, my thinking's in regards to this type of topic, I'm in that zone, and therefore it's likely that I'm using that type of literature that they would publish. But there's a possibility, and I'm not saying we should do this, I'm just saying this is something for us to think about. There's a possibility.
Disclaimer, please use the disclaimer.
Yes, exactly. No lawyers listening yet. So there's a possibility that a person could put in a few references to the editor or the academic board or the editorial board just to please them, to make them feel good, to have that little crawling up to someone. So that's the possible mama guy aspect of this, isn't it? So you have to think, am I citing the editor because he or she is the expert in their field? And if the editor, they might well be the expert in their field because that's how they get the job. Exactly. Am I citing the editorial board because these are leaders in their field? And again, the answer might be yes. Or am I citing them because that's a slight academic convention, is a game we're playing in order to get in to the journal in the first place. We need to get through the doors. Mm-hmm. So we're making sure they all feel nice and loved.
Yeah. Mama guy. Mama guy. So yeah. we want to not get lost in the mama guy, but we want to make sure we got the point from this section is that we want to outline we want to be able to identify rather what the journal is looking for. Yes, we want to get the scope, those aspects, but we also want to see simple things like a word count so that we could begin to logically break down in our head how we're going to approach our writing. So we're going to write by section. Are we going to begin narrowing down to bullets? What's my target audience? for that journal, you would know the kind of reader for it. Am I going to use subheadings? What are the subheadings going to discuss? So we begin narrowing down again. We're coming back to narrowing down and drilling down because we have an idea of what the requirement is. So we don't just jump and do what we've seen or do what we've been accustomed doing, but we see again the fit for purpose in this unique scenario.
Yeah, and that phrase, fit for purpose, that is so important, Mark. I'm glad you said that, because I have worked with a number of journals as editor, as reviewer, as all sorts, and there are people who will send almost like a spam journal email. They'll send it to everybody. Here's my article, and I'm going to send it to 100 journals, and they haven't thought about the relevance, if it fits.
Yeah.
You know, you think, why has this come to this journal? And it's not a good use of anybody's time, the reviewer's time, the editor's time, the journal's time. It's going to be rejected, and therefore it's not a good use of the author's point of view. Mm-hmm. If they had spent a lot more time looking at the fit for purpose, hone that down, work out what is right, they would only send it to the one, and you should only send it to one journal at a time.
Exactly.
They would only send it to the right place, and the likelihood of you send it to the right place and you have a match, the likelihood of being accepted should be higher. Most journals will still, we still have accept with minor changes, accept with major changes, and rejection. That's a rough scale of things. And many journals now will tell you their acceptance rates as well. They'll publish that on their website, and that'll maybe help inform your decision. I'm not saying you should. I would actually suggest that would help inform your decision, but don't necessarily go to the journal that has a high acceptance rate, because if they've got a too high acceptance rate, what is the quality? So pick something that you think this is the right place, and it's a quality place as well. This is where I want my work. You've worked hard on it. I want my work to be situated in somewhere I think matters, not just some, fly-by-night place that you have to pay to get published, and it's, I can stick it on my CV and it looks good, but you've gone through all this strife to write your article. You want to find a home for it. I want it housed nicely.
Yeah, exactly. After you used all the tools to build your house, make sure it sits in the right area.
There we go.
Yeah. So we're looking at, again, as we said, we're taking time with our structure. We're being logical about it, and we're going to make sure that it fits the requirements of the journal, but also meets the expectations of the audience. So we're down 5. Let's look at the other step now.
Right.
Reviewing and reviewing and reviewing, writing and reviewing, editing. And what is your best suggestion, idea, advice on that?
Yeah. So when it comes to the actual writing process, first of all, nothing is ever done until you've sent it. So it's never done. So you'll have 10, 15 iterations of the same paper. And by the way, don't call any paper final version, because that's not true. You'll write the next one. It's better just to kind of allocate a date to your paper, year, month, day. That's the easiest way of allocating your papers. And then when they're stored on your computer, they'll be in rank order and you can know the version numbers. But writing is never done until you send it in. And even then, it's not done until you've acted on the reviewer's comments. So that's the kind of first thing to think about with writing. There is no done. You could go on forever. It's like art. How do you know if a painting's ever complete? You could always do one more brushstroke. The other thing to think about writing is we've been talking about sections. You do your introduction, you do your myth. These things are not banked. You don't have your lit review banked and then you move on and then you do the methods and that's banked. When you write one section, you kind of have to go back to the next one and think about what have I said here, and it's the flow between those that will matter. So a paper, when it comes to writing, is a chain of sections. That's what's going to give you your flow. And if you imagine a chain, if you wiggle one end, there's a kind of ripple down the chain and the whole thing will move. So you have to think about how the parts affect each other. And the biggest bit of advice I give to anybody when they're writing is to write, then edit. And those are two different activities. Writing and editing are different activities. Your first job, especially like draft one, is to write everything you can. Sit yourself down, spend an hour. You can write 400 words in an hour. They're not going to be your finished words. They're not going to be nice, but they're getting the thoughts, the big ideas on the paper.
Onto paper, yeah.
That's draft one. Get the big ideas on the paper or on the screen. Draft two is refining it. Draft three is refining it further. And, draft 22 is when it's kind of pretty much what you want to say. But editing always follows writing. It doesn't happen at the same time. And I think people sometimes they slow down their writing by trying to do two things at once. Multitasking is a poor way of doing anything. Monotasking is much more effective. Write, then edit. So, for example, someone's going to write a sentence and say, this research takes an ethnographic approach because, and then they think, what word am I going to use? No, because that isn't a very good word. And then they right-click their mouse and they say, because of, or due to, or they find these other synonyms they can check.
Yeah.
And they're spending time just looking for fancy words and trying to make it sound good. And then now they've forgot what they were trying to say in the first place. So write it clean and dirty. Keep going forward in your writing. Don't stop. Don't go back over the previous sentence. Draft one, you only write forward. And that's the kind of best advice I can give anybody. Get everything going. If you can't think of a word, don't dwell. Underscore and move on. If you can't think of an author, underscore and move on. But draft one just goes forward. You'll get a lot of words on a bit of paper quite quickly. They won't be perfect, but you'll get something substantial you can bite into it and refine later on. And then later on you can fine-tune each part step by step. And the other thing with editing, when you get to the other end of it, you've got your final, what we're going to call the final draft, but version 2.6.7 or whatever it's going to be called. Once you have what you deem to be the ready piece of work, the best advice I can come on editing is you look through your work and you go to your final paragraph and you read your final paragraph and you edit that. Then you go to your second last paragraph and you edit that, and your third last and you edit that all the way to the beginning. And the reason for that is you're looking at the paragraph, you're looking at the specifics of the paragraph rather than the story you were telling. If you started at the beginning, you would get caught up in the story that you're telling and the features that you're talking about. If you're only editing, don't look at the story you're telling. And research does tell a story. Start at the end and edit backwards till you get to the beginning. And then save, send, and you're all done. Hopefully.
Hopefully. But, I like what you're saying. Justin is also agreeing in the chat about the iterative nature of it, Dr. Zephyrin, and how it's not a version 1 is going to end up version 1001. But
yeah.
Something I want to highlight or go back to that you mentioned is that we use these synonyms and we're trying to sound brilliant. And sounding brilliant could sometimes be our own detriment, because the editorial board may say that you are not actually meeting our audience's needs. It makes no sense that we're trying to sound brilliant, but our reader is lost. Then put yourself in that situation. You are reading literature in your literature review, but you are so lost that you can't use the literature to do anything. So when we're structuring our paper and proceeding with the writing and review, we want to make sure that it is actually to the point. It is answering the questions, highlighting the objectives, that those things are not lost because we're just trying to sound all fancy and dandy. But we want to be mindful of being clear, precise, very, very clear to the audience. And I want to highlight something from Dr. Renwick, a good suggestion that she's saying in doing the literature review. We could do alerts on various databases and on Google Scholar to keep up to date with what is current and not have to search repeatedly over time. I really like that one, and I hope persons are paying attention to it and taking notes for their research. And we have a question now concerning having a second pair of eyes. Now, we chatted about this a bit when we're doing revisions, that sometimes our 2 eyes, our 4 eyes may not be enough because we might simply be missing sometimes a perspective and sometimes part of the possible solution, especially in something like action research, could be missed if we decide to do it in a silo. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would, in a perfect world, if we had a perfect world, I would try and have two people that I could use as a second and third set of eyes. One of those people would be someone who kind of understands the field, knows something about that. It should be somebody I trust as well. I think you must be somebody you trust.
Yeah.
And there's often a power relationship. If you're a junior scholar, you have to think about who you can trust, you know.
Yeah.
And well, that's just kind of knowing your own environment and being smart in your own environment. So somebody who understands your environment that you can trust. And the great thing these days of networks is those are global. It used to be you had to knock on the door next door and the next office and say, can you look at this? Now we're global. So if you can form networks of other scholars, communities of practice, if you like, who are thinking in the same way, thinking at kind of the same level, sharing with them and getting a set of eyes on that would be really useful.
Mm-hmm.
Again, needs to be somebody you trust.
Exactly.
The other person that I still write for my mother. Now, my mother's 85 and she has no interest in the type of work that I'm doing, the academic papers. So she's not actually going to read them. But in my head, that's the person I'm writing for. So I want to make sure she's an intelligent woman. She's able to understand the things. But if I fill my paper with fancy nonsense and talk about epistemology and ontology and blah, 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 unless I can explain it to her clearly, why am I doing that? Am I doing it to show off? And I shouldn't really be showing off in front of my mother. I should be trying to be clear. And the thing about academic work is we have complex ideas and you don't want to lose your story and talking all this fancy talk. Complex ideas need to be explained with simple, clear language. That will get a reader hooked and someone will follow your narrative, follow your story. You know, I still feel embarrassed. I know that I've published things in the past that I think, oh, that's just looking back on it. I was just trying to be fancy. I was trying to show off. I was showing that I was clever. It turns out I'm actually clever, you know, so I don't need to show the world. And everybody listening to this is clever as well. You don't need to show off. You just need to be your best, clear self. It's the strength of your argument, not the words that you pick.
So we have a nice expression here: keep it dumb, keep it simple. It's easier to understand.
Yeah.
Very easy to understand.
Yeah.
And of course, in reviewing too, you want to be mindful that the person might actually have let's say a skill set in proofreading. Use again that person as a tool to help you to be in that second pair of eyes specifically for that purpose. So we've written, we've reviewed, and now we have to go and we have to beg Dr. Renwick for some help because we're at the stage for citations and we're trying to figure out how we could get this thing correct, referencing all the different styles. The Chicago, the APA, and the list goes on and on and on. And she's laughing. How could we progressively avoid the buildup of that task or that weight at the end of the entire journey?
Yeah, I think nowadays we're much more, because of we're talking a lot about the tools and we're talking about AI, but we don't even need to get as far as AI. We've got some straightforward end note type software that will do a lot of this storing of the right sources for us. And say you write for one journal and you have to use Harvard, but you want to convert it into, I don't know, Chicago for an X journal. A lot of the software will now do that work for you, where previously people would have to go to type it all out again and do the checks. So that format, often, I think the good thing about referencing is that the journal will decide what they want. So if you're publishing in a journal, or if you're publishing a book, or if you're writing a thesis, there will be guidelines that say this is what we're expecting. So, make sure, first of all, make sure you're writing to the expectations. Otherwise, you're
Right,
kind of out of
right.
step.
Again,
They'll bounce you if you send in something that looks odd to them.
yeah.
So follow that. Think about the house style of the journal. Some citation formats work better than others for certain things. So if you think about the numeric system, so this is just when you put, men like to wear hats, and then in brackets you write 1, 2, 3, 4, and here's my 4 sources. That style of writing says, here is my point, here is the proof. And that's fine. And there's a time and a place for that. And you can also do that with other forms of referencing as well. So you can do it with Harvard. You can say, men like to wear hats, in brackets, Jones 2021. That's fine. But that's quite a limited use of referencing and citation. Much better if you can sort of turn it the other way and talk about the literature first. Jones 2004 says men like to wear hats. And then, because often what happens after that is you explore it. So some formats of citation and reference kind of force you into making a statement and supporting it. But other formats help you explore it in a little bit more detail. For that reason, I have a bit of a preference for things like APA and Harvard. They encourage you to talk about the authors because of the format rather than the number. If you use a numeric system, the author is lost. The meaning of the author is lost. The reader has to follow it all down for more information. But I don't really get a choice about this because whoever I'm writing for will decide the style of the citation and referencing. And the beauty is, as I said, EndNote will fix a lot of this stuff. Mendeley, there's other softwares out there.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you use EndNote as your point because we have Dr. Rennick from the library saying that is a platform that is free to us here on campus, and we have the license for it. So please use it. She's also given a link to it in the chat. So those who are engaged with us, please use it as a tool. Dr. Hill says he uses Zotero. That's another one. And then, there are the simple ones that we don't want to get lost when we're doing the actual writing. Some persons, I've seen it, strange enough, they write cite, as in they would refer to the material and completely ignore the point of saving what is the source. So if you have things like Scribble, you're using something online, especially if you're looking at an online database, just punch it in quickly, get your correct citation. You could probably save it and have it at the right time in the right format, be it the in-text citation or the reference listing format, that it is there. And it's not that now that we've finished, oh boy, I need another week to finish this thing because I can't remember. And we want to avoid that headache when we engage in writing. So Dr. Rennick says both types of in-text citation formats should be used to make your writing readable. So that's some good suggestions that we've had thus far. And I'm really hoping that by and large, all of us here today have gained some insight. And we hope that, perhaps from our perspective, we could have a question of, did this podcast stimulate more research activity on campus? And we hope that that would be the case, that in reviewing these 7 steps and in this discussion about how we can write or go through the writing process, that it would help us in moving forward. Again, not just in traditional research, but also in our own inquiry-based approach of teaching. So research of teaching, as you highlighted earlier. So we want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts in warm, sunny Trinity for your time this morning, Dr. Blair. We really appreciate it. I think I share the sentiments of everyone that it has definitely been an interesting and beneficial dialogue on the process. And I've hoped that along the way, we too have kept it simple, kept it dumb, so that it is as easily understood and could be quickly applied as possible. That's the end goal that we're looking for. I don't want to miss this in the chat. but a student is struggling with imposter syndrome and procrastination, making the first step of realizing my procrastination is a form of fear. Fear that the supervisor reads the drafts and think that it's just trash and would get rejected by a publisher. That leads to getting caught up in endless planning. So even now he's taking notes and thinking of these pointers, but he would like some tips on how he could move from persistent planning to actually just getting it done. To actually getting it done.
Yeah, this is a big question, isn't it? I mean, we all procrastinate in areas of our life.
Yep.
And I have a motto that says procrastinate later. Procrastination always happens in the moment. I like to think about giving myself treats, and I want to earn my treats, and I want to think, right, I can sit down, I can have a beer, I can watch a movie tonight, but I got to get my work done. I used to be quite a good procrastinator. I used to be, whenever I was doing an activity, you would know that I was trying to do something because my house is spotless. I'd spend all my time cleaning the house and not doing the work. People would come in and say, your house is shiny, Eric, what's going on here? But more and more, I've decided that my approach to procrastination, I'm not saying it's the approach, is to break things down, to get it into different bite-sized elements. And when I look at the jobs that I'm expected to do, the academic jobs, whether it's writing my proposal, whether it's writing my abstract, whether it's finding my literature, I list out my jobs and I allocate time to them. And some jobs are 30-minute jobs, and some jobs are 2-hour jobs, and some job is a sit down and slog kind of job. And I think when we're procrastinating, we're focusing on the sit down slog, those big heavy jobs. Yeah. If I find myself in that situation when I'm feeling like can't get started, then I can tick off my little jobs. I needed to find 3 papers about X. I needed to download that, and I can tick off those little jobs. That makes me feel a sense of worth, a sense of achievement. I can now earn my treat, and I feel good about myself, and I'm getting this nice virtuous cycle. I'm not saying it's an easy fix, because it's not, but I think I would definitely take that approach. Look at it, list your jobs, allocate times to those jobs, and then when you're feeling that kind of not quite ready to work, do the little things, and then that'll lead you into doing the medium things. That'll lead you into doing the bigger things, hopefully later on.
So let me make sure I've got the name correct. Curtly, bite-sized chunks. Bite-sized chunks.
Yeah.
As a colleague of ours loves the expression, salami slice. So break it down into manageable tasks.
Yeah.
Again, I think some of the suggestions that we highlighted earlier could help us do that. So we spoke about sectioning off and breaking down word counts and those things. So those things would actually help us in making the work manageable, more and more manageable. So again, we thank you, Dr. Blair, for your time. We thank you so much for the insights. We enjoyed the discussion, and we would like to hear the audience's feedback based on this session. We hope that it has been beneficial to you tremendously, and we hope that it's going to promote your research and guide you in your research effort and endeavors moving forward. So we're asking you if you can use the link that has been placed in the chat to complete our user experience survey based on this morning's session. We want to get your thoughts. What was done good? What could we improve on? Please tell us. That's how we do our continuous research as we move forward. So we would appreciate your thoughts. It's not going to take you beyond 3 minutes. We could assure you of that. That's our disclaimer and our informed consent to some extent. So Dr. Blair, we thank you so much again. To all our listeners, all engaged, we thank you for being here with us. We thank you so much for engaging with us in the chat. It has been wonderful. We want to take this time before we end to extend a warm invitation to you all as researchers to please consider the call for papers put out by the Caribbean Teaching Scholar Journal. Please visit the Settle website, and you would see on the quick link section an announcement concerning the Caribbean Teaching Scholar Journal. It is back. Our scope is focusing on advancing the scholarship of teaching and learning on campus how we could improve in an inquiry-based approach to our teaching. This time, we're focusing on what we have learned from the pandemic. So please, we welcome your submissions. Keep it clean, keep it simple. We would enjoy it, and please be part of the dialogue as we advance SOTL or SOTL at our campus. Folks, thank you so much for being part of our podcast today. We enjoyed having you, and we really hope that you enjoyed it. Again, Dr. Blair, our sincere thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you for joining us for today's podcast, the podcast that explores various themes in the scholarship of teaching and learning in higher education. I hope you enjoyed this episode. You can check out the links and resources in the show notes for more information. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast on your favorite platform. Until next time, stay curious and keep learning.